Welcome to the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software Podcast, brought to you by ETAS, a single source of cutting-edge software and hardware solutions that make automotive embedded systems safe, smart, secure, and sustainable. Each episode, we'll be joined by ETAS and industry experts to discuss how electrification, automation, and connectivity are impacting the automotive industry. Now, sit back and enjoy the discussion.
Hey folks, my name is Siamak Moshiri. I'm at ETAS Sales and Business Development, and welcome to another episode of ETAS Podcast. I've got a really great guest with me today, Florian Rohde. Florian is someone who I respected for quite a while, and he's someone who not only has been around the block for quite some time in the automotive industry, but has helped actually build a few of those blocks along the way. So he's been in the automotive industry for almost 20 years. He started at Continental for about 8 years and then joined Tesla in 2012. And he was responsible for software integration and validation of the whole software level platform and hardware in the loop testing. During his tenure and 6 years at Tesla, he's been one of the key enablers of software development and basically enablers of the software-defined vehicle release capabilities and software development. Then he took his experiences to NIO, where he was involved and he was one of the key enablers of software integration in the ADAS and infotainment systems. Florian then joined consulting world at iProcess Consulting, where he advises and consults clients and customers on software-defined vehicle technologies, enablers, platforms, processes, and architectures. So, Florian, welcome to this talk.
Thank you for having me. Hi, good morning.
I understand you've been in China recently. You posted a few LinkedIn posts from your visit. To be honest, for quite some time, I was wanting to speak to someone who is not only expert and understands the software-defined vehicle, but has on-the-ground experiences from the China automotive world scene, basically. And I understand this is your second visit, is that right?
Yeah, I've been in Shanghai about 7-8 years ago as a member of NIO, where I was strictly focused on my role at NIO, and I was at the headquarters over there. Actually, I had a chance to meet the CEO, William Li, in a one-to-one meeting over there as well. And now was my second trip, but it is, 7 years in China is like decades apart, right? So there's a lot of things different. It was very interesting, the observations. And I'm talking mainly about really my observations in the streets and talking to people, obviously not talking about details, what companies are doing internally, but it's mostly like, what impressions do you get when you walk on the streets in China? It's
Yes.
Very interesting.
Exactly. So that was actually my first question. Between your first visit and second visit, quite given this speed of change, not only in China, but also everywhere else regarding the software-defined vehicle, what did you see? What was your observation between these two visits?
Yeah, so basically when you walk through the streets, there's no old cars. I mean, I understand that there's also different reasons for that, but they are renewing their whole like public fleet a lot. So you see a lot of brand new vehicles, but you also see a lot of different brands. This is one thing very fascinating to me. There were so many different car makers out there, and I asked my Chinese colleagues, "It's like, do you know how many car makers are there right now in China?" And everybody's like, "No, I don't know, 150, I don't know." It's a lot of them, and it feels like they're growing more. Feels a little bit. I mean, I wasn't here at that time, but in the 1920s in America, when you talk to the guys over at the Ford Museum, they tell you those stories. There was also 80 or 100 different car brands in America back in the day. And they started to, they joined forces, they got bought out, some of them, didn't make it and so on. And I have the feeling this is a very similar situation what we see over there in China. It's just a lot of car companies popping out. The thing is, their cars, they look really good and they feel really quality wise also really good. So
Yeah.
it's a little different than what we've seen in the past in other parts of the world where the car markets are coming up and local brands are emerging, but you have the luxurious import brands from the Western markets. That doesn't feel like that over there.
Yeah, obviously this is interesting because that takes me to the next question. I always remember the quote I heard. I think it was in a survey or something that in 2024 there was a survey done in Europe and I think in Germany, asked the German consumers what is the probability or what is the likelihood that your second car be a Chinese vehicle, given that now China is present in European market, and 53%, if I'm not mistaken, 54% of the respondents say yes, a Chinese vehicle could be our next vehicle. So from that perspective, what do you think in terms of brand, and if you can remember what brands of vehicles of China in terms of quality could be competitive in non-Chinese markets?
So first, talking about the people's opinion about that, right? We've seen that before, but it took much longer. You've seen that in Germany, for example. So I grew up in Germany, and it was Skoda back in the day, which also was from a rather cheap vehicle to something that was a good decision to buy. And that's literally what people said when your neighbor bought a Skoda. It's like, oh yeah, that's a good car, good investment. I mean, it's not a fancy car, but it's a good investment. We've seen the same thing now coming with Chinese vehicles as well, but in a much shorter time frame. So the Skoda example was probably like 20, 30 years, and then a massive support of Volkswagen. And I know a few people over in Europe who drive Chinese cars, and I'm very, very happy with that, mostly about the cost for what they get, right? So they buy a car for a reasonable price, and they get a car that does the job well. And that's I think one of the biggest topics about those vehicles coming over into Europe is you get a product that does the job well, but it is actually much more reasonable in price. Regarding the brands, so I personally found Zeekr as a very interesting brand. But as I said, there's a lot of brands out there. I can't tell you. I don't speak Chinese, so I can't actually read how the brand is called, right? And I asked, and they told me, okay, this isn't this brand, but we haven't seen them yet. So there's a lot that we haven't really experienced or seen over there. So in summary, all of these vehicles look very modern and very competitive. And that's not only the quick glance over, also from the look and feel, from the touch quality. So they caught up a lot in that. Going back to the earlier examples, when first Japanese cars came over in the 80s, then Korean cars in the 2000s, they always entered through a low price point, but also with a rather low expectation on build quality and stuff like that.
Right.
That is not the case over there. So those vehicles, they don't look cheap and they don't feel cheap. And I don't know the actual price tag over there, but obviously compared with an imported vehicle from Germany, it's much more attractive. Interesting fact is when you walk through the streets, you see all those local or Chinese built cars, and you see a few import cars, for example, from Germany. They look outdated. So that it's a completely different perception suddenly. So the imported high price cars look outdated, while the locally built, reasonably priced cars actually look more modern. And that's just from the outside, and like when you look in interior and this kind of things. And we haven't even started talking about the SDV features and the user experience, right? It feels like that the imported cars over there, they are like for transportation, not for user experience.
Right. Yeah, and I think the quality, in terms of quality, the first 10, 15, 20 years that the European and American car manufacturers were quite active in China market, that helped elevate the quality of Chinese vehicles. So these features that I see in this German car, I want to have also in Chinese, mimicked or kind of rivaled those features in their vehicles. Now, my next question is, when we talk about the SDVs, basically SDV is something has to come from the consumer experience, right? So if the consumer experience does not demand a SDV experience, there's no points for because there's a lot of cost into implementing an SDV for manufacturers. How much do you think Chinese consumers We see a lot of hype around, okay, Chinese consumers love different features in the infotainment systems, or they like the experience when they see in the car, they need to have this and that features, whereas those features are not really probably so well defined by other consumers in the non-China market. How much do you think this whole evolution, fast evolution of the China SDV architectures influenced by consumers really?
I think this is a very important and great point. It was starting to be more visible for me when I was working over there. Was this 2 weeks before I was in Germany, so I had a very direct comparison. Right, the consumers in the Chinese consumers are very like techy, and they want the newest gadgets, and they are very natural in doing that. So when you see how they are acting with those technologies, you see it's much more common to them, and they're used to this, and they want to pull in the new options or the new features. When you look, and this is not only Europe, I see the same thing here in the US. Customers are much more conservative in what they are asking for. And in the last few weeks, after I've seen those different markets, and I see my local market all the time, I started to realize that the progress in the area of SDV is also, let's say, positively influenced in China by the Chinese customer, and is actually held back a little bit in US and in Europe. You know, the most hyped new feature in the American car market was actually a split truck, pickup truck liftgate that was featured in a Super Bowl commercial. So while the consumers in China, they want to have like full graphical integration of traffic lights, vehicle to infrastructure interfaces, and have live updates and stuff like this, the American customer wants to have a new liftgate on his pickup truck. So at that, the industry is actually, forced is maybe the wrong word, but very motivated in China also to raise the speed and to produce those new features and approaches. So it's actually interesting. What we see is there's a lot of finger pointing within the automotive industry to the OEMs and to the tier ones, and they have to get faster, and they have to build more SDV, and they have to all this. But the consumer actually is not urgently asking for it. So makes it a little bit, the question is like, who wants it or needs it? What we see over in China is like it goes hand in hand, right? The industry is producing new features and integrations really fast, and the consumers are pulling them in, and they're actually using them. So it actually creates a business case.
I think it's basically, this is the right how do I say, trajectory to be in, where the consumers and producers or manufacturers working hand in hand. It's like a push-pull situation, where you exactly described that if this push-pull is not really in harmony, then we feel, okay, then we're going to have a hard time monetization and all those subscription models that people are struggling with these days in terms of business model. That's great. So what do you think then China would be in 2, 3, 4 years, or maybe by the end of this decade, in terms of their trajectory of the software-defined vehicle, since given their fast developments and advancements in the last 5 years?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts there. So first of all, I get a lot into this discussion that Chinese cars in Europe, or no Chinese cars to the US and stuff like this. China has a huge economy and has a large country that just starts to discover cars for transportation purposes. They are very busy to serve their own needs. Of course, they like to export and to grow, but it's very obvious when you walk over there in the streets, it's like there's a lot of automotive industry is booming within the country. So that's one observation. Then the next observation is the takt time of building new product is significantly reduced compared to what we know from traditional car making. Originally, you had 7 to 8 years for a new model going to market. This was shrunk down to 2 to 4 years already. This time around, they tell me the goal is 14 months to bring a new car to market. 14 months. That's slightly over a year. When I was working at NIO, William actually put out the goal, one new car per year. Right? It's one new model, right? The way they are doing that, and that's not a secret, every car manufacturer is focusing on this approach for the last 20 years, is platform approach, right? So you run a platform approach, and then you create new models based on your platform. What's new here is the software platform. So when a traditional car maker is talking about a platform and so on, yes, it is. It's a vehicle, and you make it a station wagon, you make it a convertible, whatever, and you build on that platform, or you make a different brand of your company is building their own vehicle with a different label and brand on it, but it is the same platform. From software point of view, you have one company platform, and you can actually mechanically design vehicles, electrically design their components, and then you go to the company software platform and you pull down the software that is already there. And you, of course, this is simplified, but then you have integration work to be done, and you don't start over from scratch every time. And that's the only way you can reach 14 hours. Sorry, 14 hours is maybe soon, but 14 months for new vehicles to market.
And that's basically a great segue to the next one, that I know that you have a passion, and I've seen you spoke in different events about not only the architecture itself, because the architecture itself is engineering, right? So engineering of the hardware software decoupling, but also there's more to it. There's always organization part, there's always process part, and the business side of it. And I know that you have spoke about this all the time. So do you think that China is doing this, is orchestrating this whole architecture, business process architecture, and organization in a more fluent and more, do you think they got the hang of it compared to maybe the companies that we deal with here? Or what's your take on that?
Yes, those are three different topics. Let me address one after the other, because it's not one answer that for all. So from architecture point of view, I was very impressed, and I cannot, unfortunately for NDA reasons, I can't go into detail, but I was very impressed. I was demonstrated some past, present, and future architecture ideas, and it is pretty much aligned with what I would propose to OEMs as well. So from architecture point of view, I think they have a good hang on it. The good thing for them is they don't have much legacy, right? So the first generation of cars, they were just purely integrating third-party components. Now they are starting to build their own architectures in collaboration. This is just also how the Chinese culture is. You know, you collaborate by design with your suppliers and so on. But yeah, from architecture point of view, they're going definitely into the direction of what we call high compute power systems, so HPC units in the car and so on, central architecture. Right now, it's domain architecture. Without going into more details, they got a checkbox on that. The next was organization-wise. So organization-wise, and this is what I'm talking with them a lot, they have a challenge. They are really good in creating those, new features and so on. But the efficiency, that's what we're working on, right? So they have a lot of engineers, a lot of labor going into those features, and they address those quick pace with a big human resource pool. And even over in China, labor is getting slightly more expensive over time. So that's what we are discussing, right? So how can we actually be more efficient? For example, use leaner structures and organizations. For example, use more automation. For example, use closed loop learning from our fleet, and so on and so on and so on. Very interesting topics. At that point, they actually learn from us. Something Chinese are traditionally anchored in with their approach and culture is that processes have to be followed and the processes have to be designed upfront. Similar to what we see also with European and US OEMs. And they're struggling because change is happening so fast and the process actually breaks or slows down the change. And that's something we are openly discussing with them. You have to start a more agile process. So not agile, the framework, but your process itself has to be more agile. Right. So as an example, I mean, as you mentioned in the beginning, I was at Tesla for 6 years, and the first question I get from OEMs is like, hey, can you just tell us the exact process how Tesla does software? And I say, well, I can't tell you the process of the last week I was there, but the next week it was different, right? So there is a process, and I think it is very important when you have large engineering organizations. Of course, it is important that you have a process, but the most important thing is to have a dynamic process that continuously improves. If you run into a stopgap with your current process, or you have to do something only to satisfy the process, but it doesn't make the product any better, then you should actually open up that process and say, okay, we have to improve and we have to change that. this is where the OEMs and suppliers in China just get into the groove, right? So it's also a mindset thing. While, when you look here in Silicon Valley, for example, there's a lot of engineers like, okay, I want to improve everything. I want to improve the product, the process. I want to improve the organization and so on. And I'll do it right now. And then the company says, okay, cool, do it. Well, in the Chinese company, traditionally, this is not how they work, right? So it's just coming up that the engineers are actually rethinking some of their processes and so on. But it was interesting. I overheard is tricky because I don't speak Chinese, but there was like an AI-based translating tool that translated my voice into Chinese. And sometimes it worked backward as well. And I overheard a couple of engineers saying, like, after I presented my continuous delivery SDV framework and so on, they said, this is what we want to do, and this is what we are aware that we have to do that. Now we just have to live it and have to adjust our company processes and so on. So it's not a big secret to them how to do the whole SDV thing, but they also have to adjust a little bit. They come from a different direction, right? So they come from, 10, 20 years of legacy and really into IoT world and in production of a lot of things. So they can build a lot of things with the same quality really, really fast, right? So they have to learn a couple of different things than, for example, a European or an American OEM.
Yeah, I think just when you were talking, it just jumped in my mind that like in the 70s or 80s, when Toyota production system, TPS was, or lean production or just in time was very good concepts and new concepts and very creative concepts in the automotive industry, where a lot of OEMs learned from maybe Japanese, but actually I heard also that just in time or TPS was not originated in Japan. Japan implemented them in a very good way. So I think 60s, a few universities in the US actually invented those concepts, and then they were more implemented in Japan. But then anyways, Toyota promoted them and used them as a way of reducing cost and basically improving efficiency. We are right now on the cusp of another development in the automotive industry where Agile systems and software factory and everything is coming to market. But I wish we had a little bit more open market as we used to have in 70s and 80s with the whole world, that the automotive companies could, work together much more collaboratively. Yesterday actually was the opening of the Shanghai Auto Show. I'm not sure if you follow that or not. So I think we'll hear more and more from the latest recent developments from that event soon after the show is underway. And we'll see that basically how I heard like 80 OEMs actually are participating, and 140, 150 new vehicle platforms are being showcased. So that's amazing. I think 80% of them are EVs, if I'm not mistaken, from the news I heard.
Especially when you compare to the CES here in Las Vegas this year, where there was basically no Western OEMs, only Chinese OEMs, and the Chinese OEMs showcased cars for their market over here. So that brings us a little bit back to the original discussions, like the market and the demand in the market as well, right? So you can almost say it's like, okay, if the market doesn't ask for all this progress and this futuristic improvements, they're kind of like at fault as well, so that our industry is stagnating a bit.
Well, Florian, that's been great. It's been a great conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for letting me picking your brain on some of these topics, and I hope that we can have another conversation soon. Thank you for everyone for tuning in and listening, and we will come back to you soon for another topic. Thanks.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software podcast. Please leave a comment or review with your feedback or what you'd like to hear in future episodes. To learn more about automotive embedded systems and ETAS's capabilities, visit our website at ETAS. That's ETAS.com.